Greetings my fellow freaks and weirdos, I'm Tom and welcome to Monster Gab, where we love to talk about all things horror. And in today's episode we're going to be talking about a Dutch horror movie called De Rombkekomber. I think. Wait a minute.
De Rombkekomber.
De Rombkekomber.
De Rombkekomber.
Yeah, alright. So, De Rombkekomber is a 45-minute, zero-budget domestic movie, and it was created by Ricardo van den Bracht. Ricardo, I really hope I pronounced your name right there. If not, I do apologise. So as I mentioned, this is not a legitimately released movie, it's a homemade movie. So why am I reviewing it? Well, I'm actually a member of many horror-based Facebook groups, and quite often I share my YouTube content on there. And Ricardo, being a member of one of these groups, just commented on one of my posts saying, Tom, from one content creator to another, I'll watch your content if you're willing to watch mine. Kind of a, I'll show you yours if you show me mine situation. When I realised that Ricardo's content was actually a homemade horror movie with the help of just a few friends or some volunteers, I couldn't resist. From one horror fan to another, I said, I'll do you one better. Rather than just watch your movie, how about I review it? And so here we are. I don't want to use the word amateur to describe this movie, as it may come across as a bit degrading, if not rude, but I do think it is important to point out that this is indeed a homemade movie. Compared to a legitimately released commercial movie, this film could potentially be an easy target for mockery, and some people may not consider watching it. So before I review it, I think it's important to address that De Rombkekomber was made with literally no budget whatsoever. It appears to me that Ricardo only had a couple of cameras and anyone else involved in the movie were just volunteers. With that in mind, there are obviously going to be unpolished imperfections. But listen, making a movie is not as easy as it sounds. It's actually quite hard to do. It's not as simple as just taking a camera outside and filming a few shots. De Rombkekomber has a story, it has dialogue, it has a soundtrack, it has multiple camera angles, and it has editing too. Ricardo didn't allow his limitations to prevent him from making this film. In fact, I'd applaud anyone to make a better movie with the same limitations. Remember, this is a zero-budget film. So here is the synopsis then. After the strange disappearance of her mother, Pamela inherits a mysterious music box. She has no desire to play the music box herself, but when two of her closest friends pay a visit in support of her current circumstance, one of them feels compelled to hear the melody of Pamela's curious device. An infernal curse is unleashed upon the three friends who are exposed to the evil jingle of the music box with the release of De Rombkekomber, a demon that wishes to claim the three as its victims. Will they survive, or is doom inevitable? Let's talk about this movie then. So first of all, I should mention that this movie is indeed Dutch. So if you're like me and only understand the English language, you are going to struggle with knowing what the characters are saying. However, the entire 45-minute movie is available on YouTube, and I've read in the comments that Ricardo is hoping to add English subtitles at some point. I for one would really appreciate this, as there is a lot of dialogue in this movie and I'd be quite interested to know what the characters are saying. Although even without the dialogue, it's quite easy to get the gist of what's going on, and I personally had no trouble understanding what was happening in the movie. Due to how this film was made, and its low budget, there is obviously a certain quality to expect. But if anything, the quality of this film just reminds me of trashy 80s horror movies, and that's not a criticism. For someone who actually grew up with straight-to-video, trashy 80s horror movies, this film actually made me feel quite nostalgic. And some of the nostalgia that I felt from this movie is thanks to its soundtrack or score. Now, I believe the music in this film consists of royalty-free tracks. I could be wrong, and correct me if I am, Ricardo. But yeah, you've got your typical horror ambient music in this film, but there's also some really cool electronic synthy tracks, again, very reminiscent of 80s horror movies. I think this choice of music is a really good one, as it really goes with the image of the movie. I highly approve. Oh, and while we're on the topic of nostalgia, I noticed the characters in this film are playing a Super Nintendo, Street Fighter 2 no less. Yeah, old school. It's not relevant to this review, but I do applaud the decision. Gotta love me some Super Nintendo, man. Yeah, in fact, I might play a little bit after this review. Now, the Rombkekomber does have its typical horror cliches. I know some people don't like cliches because they are things that have happened before in horror movies and we see them over and over again. Typical things like people falling over when they're being chased or a car not starting when you need to get away. I personally quite like cliches in horror films. They're the tropes that we're familiar with. We all want to see originality when we watch a new horror film, but those typical cliches and horror tropes, the jump scares and familiar moments are usually the reason why I watch horror movies. The Rombkekomber does have the typical shower scene, which yes, has been done many times before, but there's a reason why. It's because it works so well. It's a moment of vulnerability, and that's why it works so well. And during this scene, we see some flickering lights, which, yes, are more horror tropes, but aren't they the reasons why we watch horror movies? They are very typical, familiar moments, but I do appreciate them, and I'm glad to see them in this film. It shows that the person making this film is a real horror fan. You know, even the story of the music box could be considered cliche too, but you know what? I actually liked the story in this film, and I like the mystery elements of it too. Now, I thought the acting in this film was fine, and that's despite not actually understanding the dialogue. It's my understanding that the people starring in this film aren't actually actors anyway, as the film is made up of volunteers, but I'm not entirely sure about that. As far as I'm concerned, they played their roles fine. The characters don't really have too much to offer in this film, but they are key to the story. The only issue I had with the characters is one of them spent a lot of screen time tossing and catching a ball, which to me seemed like very odd behaviour. Maybe this is a custom in other nations, I don't know, but to me it just came across as very unnatural behaviour, especially towards the character's most tense moments. Maybe during those tense moments he was doing it for distraction, I don't know, but it's only a minor complaint. Now, the demon in the Rombkekomber is a very physical one, and I mean that in more ways than one. The demon is more physical than spiritual in appearance, but that may be due to the movie's budget rather than choice. Secondly, the demon is very physical in the way it attacks its victims and very brutal. So let's talk about the pros and the cons of this movie. And normally I start with the pros, but I'm going to start with the cons on this one. One of the cons for me is this movie has too much daylight in it. I'd have liked to have seen more scenes shot at night, or at least in the dark anyway, as this really would have ramped up the fear factor. But again, I've got to defend Ricardo here and say once more that it is a low-budget movie. You know, he had limitations. Perhaps he couldn't film in the dark for whatever reason. Filming in the dark isn't easy. It requires the correct type of lighting, and perhaps Ricardo didn't have that luxury. Another con for me is the image of the demon, and I do apologise, Ricardo, I'm not trying to mock your movie here, but the demon does just look like a guy in a Halloween mask. But again, I know that this movie had no budget, and I don't know how else you could have created a demon. I couldn't have done a better job myself, so there you go. And one final con that I have with this movie, and it's just a personal gripe, but the character who tosses the ball constantly throughout the film just seems like very unnatural behaviour to me anyway, but it's just a personal gripe. As for the pros of this film, I absolutely love the vision that Ricardo has here. You can tell that he is a horror fan, and his vision really does show in this film. I love the use of multiple camera angles, and I've no doubt he was limited to how many cameras he could use, but he used them to his greatest advantage here. I also love the story. I thought the story was great, and I really enjoyed the choice of music too. You know, again, it made me feel really nostalgic, but it really does fit the image of the movie. Choices of camera angles, the pacing, the storytelling. It almost makes you wonder what Ricardo is really capable of creating, should he have the correct finance behind his movie making. One other pro that I have for this film is the use of the abandoned building at the end of the movie. Now, I haven't really spoken about this because it's kind of the climax of the film and I don't want to give away any spoilers, but I absolutely love the imagery of this, and I do wish it lasted just a little bit longer actually, but it does look great and I do appreciate this part of the movie. So this is normally the part of the review where I would give a score out of 10, but I'm not going to do that, and here's the reason why. I have kind of interacted with Ricardo recently, and if I was to give his film a high score, some people may think I'm being biased. If I was to give him a low score, that would come across as cruel, and I want to be as fair as possible. So what I will say is I give this movie my seal of approval, and I recommend that you, as fellow horror fans, at least give it a watch. It's totally free on YouTube right now. In fact, I'll leave a link in the description below. But, you know, support your horror community. From one fellow horror fan to another, give his film a watch. And even if you don't like it, leave a like on there anyway, and a comment. Give him some encouragement, because it's great to see people doing this and creating horror content. And Ricardo, I hope I haven't criticised your film too much. I want to thank you so much for inviting me to watch your movie. I really did enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else you create. So guys, if you haven't seen the film already, go and watch it, then come back and let me know in the comment section what you thought of Ricardo's film, The Rombkekomber. The Rombkekomber. Wait.
The Rombkekomber.
That one. Anyway, that's all we've got time for in this episode, and until next time, I don't know who they are, but if you don't subscribe, they will get you. So make sure you are indeed subscribed. Click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new video here on Monster Gab. Like the video if you did indeed like it, and leave a comment down there. Share this with your friends, and thank you so much for stopping by. Take care. See you soon. Bye bye.